The morning sun barely crested the Afghan mountains when Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stepped off the helicopter at Forward Operating Base Shank. Her boots hit the dusty ground with purpose, but the looks she received from the assembled SEAL team, 6 operators, were anything but welcoming. At 5'6" and weighing just 140 pounds, she looked almost fragile next to the mountain-sized warriors who surrounded her. Commander Jake "Razor" Thompson, a 15-year veteran with arms like tree trunks, crossed his massive frame and studied the CIA operative with obvious skepticism. His weathered face, scarred from countless missions, showed no emotion as he looked her up and down. The other 7 SEALs behind him exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They had been told a specialist would join their high-priority mission, to capture a Taliban commander, but nobody mentioned she would be a woman who looked like she belonged in an office, not a battlefield. Sarah could feel their doubt radiating like heat from the desert sand. She had faced this reaction before during her 8 years with the agency's Special Operations Group. Men always underestimated her until they saw what she could do with a rifle. But this mission was different. Intelligence indicated that Khalil Hakim, a ruthless Taliban leader responsible for coordinating attacks that killed dozens of American soldiers, was hiding in a compound just 20 miles from their location. The window to capture him was closing fast. "You sure about this, Command?" Razor spoke into his radio, never taking his eyes off Sarah. "We're talking about a direct action mission in hostile territory. This isn't a reconnaissance job." The response crackled back through static, confirming that Sarah would accompany them as their designated marksman and intelligence asset. She knew Pashto, Dari, and had spent 2 years operating in this exact region. On paper, she was the perfect addition to their team, but papers didn't carry 100-pound packs through mountain passes or hold steady when bullets started flying. The SEALs had seen plenty of perfect operators wash out when reality hit. Petty Officer Mike "Ghost" Williams, the team's primary sniper, shook his head slightly. He had been doing this job for 12 years and had never worked alongside a female operative in combat. The unknown variables made him nervous. Sarah adjusted her gear and checked her custom-built rifle one final time. The weapon was a thing of beauty. A .300 Winchester Magnum with a Schmidt and Bender scope that she had zeroed personally at ranges up to 2,200 meters. Every modification had been made with precision in mind. She had fired over 10,000 rounds through this rifle and knew its behavior like a musician knows their instrument. But knowing your weapon and proving yourself to a SEAL team were 2 very different challenges. The briefing tent was thick with tension as maps were spread across a folding table. Satellite images showed the target compound nestled in a valley between 2 ridgelines, surrounded by smaller buildings that could house dozens of fighters. The mission plan called for the team to insert via helicopter under cover of darkness, establish overwatch positions, and move in to capture Hakim alive if possible. Sarah's role would be providing sniper support from a ridge approximately 800 meters from the compound. "Listen up," Razor addressed his men, his voice carrying the authority of countless successful missions. "I don't care what anyone thinks about our new team member. We follow protocol, we stick to the plan, and we all come home. Clear?" The SEALs nodded, but Sarah could still feel their reservations. She understood their concern. In their world, hesitation or weakness could get everyone killed. Trust had to be earned through action, not words. As the team prepared their equipment for the night mission, Sarah noticed the subtle ways they excluded her from their routine. Conversations stopped when she approached. Gear checks happened without including her weapons. It was psychological warfare, intentional or not, designed to make her question her place on the team. She had experienced similar treatment during her early CIA training, but it still stung. These men had no idea what she had sacrificed to earn her position or the demons she had faced in dark places around the world. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was conducted in complete silence except for the rhythmic beating of rotor blades. Sarah closed her eyes and ran through her mental checklist. Wind calculations, target distances, emergency extraction procedures. She visualized different scenarios, planning her shots and movements with the precision of a chess master thinking 10 moves ahead. This was her meditation, her way of finding calm before the storm that was surely coming. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust 3 kilometers from the target compound. Sarah was the first to exit, her rifle already in her hands as she scanned the moonlit landscape for threats. The SEALs followed, moving with the silent efficiency that had made them legends. Within seconds, the aircraft disappeared into the night, leaving 9 warriors alone in enemy territory. The trek to their positions required crossing rough terrain in complete darkness. Sarah matched the punishing pace set by the SEALs, her smaller frame carrying the same heavy load as the men around her. Rocky slopes and loose shale tested every muscle in her legs, but she never complained or asked for help. After 2 hours of climbing, they reached the overwatch position where Sarah would set up her sniper nest. "This is where we part ways," Razor whispered, his face painted with black camouflage. "You have 90 minutes to get into position and establish communications. We move on the compound at 03:30 hours exactly." Sarah nodded and began unpacking her equipment. The SEAL commander watched her for a moment before adding, "Don't make us regret bringing you along." His words carried the weight of his team's lives. As the SEALs melted into the darkness toward their assault positions, Sarah began the methodical process of preparing her hide site. She scraped away loose rocks, arranged natural camouflage, and set up her rifle on its bipod with practiced precision. The compound below looked peaceful in the green glow of her night vision scope, but intelligence reports indicated at least 20 enemy fighters were sleeping inside those walls. Sarah's earpiece crackled to life as each SEAL team element checked in from their positions. Ghost had established a secondary sniper position on the opposite ridge. The assault team was in place just outside the compound's eastern wall. The support team controlled the only vehicle exit route. Everyone was ready except for one crucial element. They still needed confirmation that Hakim was actually inside the building. Through her scope, Sarah watched the compound with the patience of a hunter. Hours of surveillance training had taught her to notice the smallest details that others might miss. Guard rotations, light patterns, even the way dogs moved around the buildings could provide valuable intelligence. At 03:15 hours, she spotted movement in the main building's upper window, a figure pacing back and forth, gesturing as if giving orders. The body language and size matched their target perfectly. "Overwatch to command," Sarah whispered into her radio. "I have eyes on a possible jackpot in the north building, 2nd floor, 3rd window from the left. Individual matches target profile and appears to be in command position." The response was immediate. They had found their man. But before anyone could move, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. 3 vehicles were approaching. The compound from the south, their headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. Sarah counted at least 12 additional fighters as they poured out of the trucks, all carrying automatic weapons. The odds had just shifted dramatically. Against the SEAL team, what should have been a surgical strike against 20 enemies had become a potential massacre against over 30 well-armed fighters. "Multiple vehicles arriving south side," Sarah reported urgently. "Count 12 additional hostiles, possibly more. They appear to be setting up defensive positions." The radio fell silent as commanders processed this new threat. The mission parameters had changed completely, but aborting now meant losing their best chance to capture Hakim for months or possibly years. Razor's voice cut through the static with calm authority. "All elements stand by. We adapt and overcome. Overwatch, I need you to thin the herd before we move in. Take out the exterior guards and anyone who looks like they're organizing resistance. Can you do that?" Sarah felt her heart rate slow as she entered the zone that had made her one of the CIA's most effective operators. This was why she was here. "Affirmative, Command. I count 6 targets in optimal positions for elimination, engaging in 60 seconds. Sarah began her calculations, factoring in distance, wind speed, and bullet drop. 6 different targets meant 6 different firing solutions. She would have perhaps 10 seconds between her first shot and the moment when chaos erupted across the compound. Every shot had to be perfect. The first target was a guard walking the perimeter wall, his AK-47 slung casually across his shoulder. Sarah tracked his movement, waiting for the perfect moment when he paused to light a cigarette. The crosshairs settled on his center mass. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm. Between one heartbeat and the next, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle's suppressor reduced the sound to a soft cough, and 800 meters away, the guard crumpled without a sound. Sarah's first shot had been perfect, but she knew the real test was just beginning. Her second target stood near the compound's main gate, arguing with another fighter about guard positions. She adjusted her scope for the slightly different range and squeezed the trigger again. The man dropped instantly, his companion looking around in confusion before he too fell to Sarah's third shot. The suppressed rifle allowed her to work in deadly silence, but she knew time was running short. Someone would notice the missing guard soon. Her fourth target was positioned on a rooftop with a clear view of the SEAL assault route. This shot was more challenging. The angle was steep and the fighter kept moving. Sarah waited with supernatural patience until he finally stopped to peer through binoculars. Her bullet found its mark with surgical precision. 2 more targets remained from her initial count, but the situation was evolving rapidly. Through her scope, Sarah watched more fighters emerge from buildings, alerted by some instinct that danger was near. What had started as a manageable number of enemies was growing into a small army. She needed to work faster while maintaining perfect accuracy. Every missed shot could mean disaster for the SEAL team preparing to breach the compound. Her fifth target was a fighter carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He posed the greatest threat to the incoming assault team. Sarah tracked him as he moved between buildings, waiting for a clear shot that wouldn't risk hitting civilians or friendlies. When he finally stopped in an open courtyard, she didn't hesitate. The heavy projectile sent him spinning to the ground, the RPG clattering away harmlessly. The sixth target was the most difficult yet, a man who seemed to sense something was wrong. He kept moving, staying close to walls and cover, his head constantly turning as he scanned for threats. Sarah realized he might be a veteran fighter with combat experience. She would need to be more creative. When he finally stopped to shout orders at other fighters, Sarah was ready. Her shot took him center mass and he collapsed against a wall. Overwatch to all elements, Sarah radioed calmly. 6 targets eliminated. Compound security is degraded but still dangerous. I count approximately 20 remaining hostiles, possibly more inside buildings. Her voice carried no emotion, no excitement from the successful shots. This was simply her job, executed with professional precision. But as Sarah surveyed the compound for additional threats, she spotted something that changed everything. A small group of children had emerged from one of the buildings, apparently awakened by the noise and confusion. They were moving directly toward the main compound where Hakim was hiding, the same building the SEALs would need to assault. Any explosive entry would put innocent lives at risk. "Command, we have a problem," Sarah transmitted urgently. "Multiple civilian children moving toward the primary target building. Recommend holding assault until they clear the area." The response was immediate and harsh. They couldn't afford to wait. Intelligence indicated Hakim was planning to move locations at dawn, which was less than 2 hours away. This was their only chance. Razor's voice crackled through the radio with grim determination. "Overwatch, we need you to find another way. Can you get a clear shot on Jackpot from your position? Take him out, and we abort the assault." Sarah adjusted her scope to scan the upper windows of the main building. Through the thermal imaging, she could see several figures moving around inside, but identifying Hakim with certainty would be nearly impossible at this range and angle. "Negative on positive identification," Sarah reported. "Too many bodies, insufficient angle for confirmation, but I have an alternative solution." She had spotted something during her surveillance that might work, a water tower positioned perfectly to give her a different angle on the target building. The only problem was getting there would require leaving her protected position and moving 200 meters through potentially hostile territory. "What's your plan, Overwatch?" Razor asked, though Sarah could hear the skepticism in his voice. "I can reposition to the water tower southeast of the compound. It will give me clear line of sight to the target building and eliminate the civilian risk. I'll need covering fire and 15 minutes to make the move." The radio went quiet as the team leader considered this dangerous option. Ghost's voice broke the silence from his Overwatch position. "Negative, that's suicide. You'll be exposed crossing open ground with at least 20 hostiles still active. Find another way." But Sarah was already packing her equipment. She had studied the terrain during their approach and identified several routes that offered partial concealment. It would be risky, but the alternative was scrubbing the mission or risking civilian casualties. "I'm making the move," Sarah announced, slinging her rifle across her back and beginning her descent from the ridge. "All elements provide suppressive fire on my signal. I'll be off communications for approximately 10 minutes while I relocate." Before anyone could object, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving the SEALs to wonder if they would ever see their new team member alive again. Sarah moved through the darkness like a shadow, using every bit of cover the rocky terrain provided. Her heart pounded as she crossed open spaces, knowing that discovery would mean certain death. Behind her, she could hear the SEALs repositioning to provide covering fire if needed. The weight of her rifle and equipment seemed to double with each step, but she pushed forward with determination born from years of dangerous missions. Halfway to the water tower, Sarah froze as voices carried across the night air. Two fighters were walking directly toward her position, their AK-47s held ready as they investigated the area where their comrades had fallen. She had seconds to decide: hide and hope they passed by, or take action that might compromise the entire mission. Sarah chose a third option, one that required nerves of steel and perfect timing. She waited until the fighters were just 10 meters away, then used her sidearm to eliminate both threats with 2 precisely placed shots. The suppressed pistol made barely more noise than a cough, but she knew other enemies might have heard something. Sarah quickly dragged the bodies behind a large boulder and continued toward her objective, knowing that every second increased the risk of discovery. The water tower loomed above her like a steel skeleton against the starlit sky. Sarah began climbing the maintenance ladder with her rifle slung across her back, each rung bringing her higher above the compound and closer to the perfect shooting position. At 50 feet above ground, she could see the entire layout spread below her like a tactical map come to life. From this elevated position, Sarah had an unobstructed view into the target building's windows. She quickly set up her rifle on the tower's narrow platform, using her backpack as a stabilizing rest. Through her scope, she could now clearly see inside the room where Hakim was meeting with his lieutenants. The Taliban commander was exactly where intelligence had predicted, planning his next attack against American forces. "Overwatch in position," Sarah whispered into her radio. "I have positive identification on Jackpot. Clear shot available through the north-facing window. Civilian children have moved away from the target area. Request permission to engage." The response came back immediately from Razor, his voice tight with anticipation and concern for his teammate, who had just completed an impossible infiltration. But before Sarah could take the shot, new complications arose. A patrol of 4 fighters emerged from a building directly below her position, their flashlights sweeping the area around the water tower's base. If they looked up, they would spot her immediately. She was trapped 70 feet above ground with nowhere to run and enemies approaching from below. Sarah made a split-second decision that would either save the mission or doom them all. Instead of waiting for the patrol to discover her, she chose to engage them from above using her sidearm. 4 quick shots dropped the fighters before they could raise an alarm, but the sound of bodies hitting the ground would attract attention. Within minutes, "All elements, this is Overwatch," Sarah transmitted urgently. "I'm compromised but still have the shot. Recommend immediate assault to capitalize on confusion. I can provide Overwatch for your breach." Through her scope, she could see fighters throughout the compound beginning to react to the disturbance. Windows lit up as people grabbed weapons and prepared for battle. Razor didn't hesitate. "All elements, we're going hot. Breach in 30 seconds. Overwatch, keep Jackpot in your crosshairs but do not fire until he tries to escape. We need him alive if possible." Sarah acknowledged the order while tracking Hakim through her scope. The Taliban commander was clearly aware that something was happening. He had moved away from the window and was shouting orders to his men. SEAL assault began with controlled explosions that breached the compound's walls in 3 different locations. Sarah watched through her scope as 8 highly trained operators flowed into the compound like water, moving with practiced precision toward their objectives. Her job now was to prevent enemy fighters from reinforcing the target building or setting up defensive positions that could trap the assault team. From her elevated position, Sarah had a commanding view of the entire battlefield. She began engaging targets systematically, prioritizing anyone who posed a threat to the SEALs below. A fighter trying to set up a machine gun on a rooftop. Another attempting to flank the assault team from behind. Each shot was calculated and precise, supporting the ground assault with deadly effectiveness. But Sarah's most important target remained inside the building, and she could see through the thermal scope that Hakim was moving toward what appeared to be a back exit. If he escaped into the maze of surrounding buildings, they might never find him again. The mission would be a failure despite all their efforts and risks. "Command, Jackpot is moving toward the rear exit," Sarah reported, while simultaneously engaging 2 fighters who were trying to reinforce that same exit. "I can take the shot, but it's through 2 walls and a window. High probability of kill, low probability of capture." The decision ultimately rested with Razor, who was currently fighting his way through the building's lower level with 3 other SEALs. The battle below reached a critical moment as Sarah watched Hakim move closer to his escape route. Through her thermal scope, she could track his heat signature even through walls, but taking a shot through multiple barriers would be extremely difficult. One small miscalculation could mean missing entirely, or worse, hitting one of the SEAL operators who were fighting their way up the building's staircase. "Overwatch, take the shot," Razor commanded over the radio, his voice strained from combat. "We're pinned down on the 2nd floor. If he gets outside, we lose him." Sarah steadied her rifle and began calculating the complex ballistics required for such a difficult shot. The bullet would need to penetrate exterior wall material, travel through interior space, and still retain enough energy to stop the target. Sarah's finger moved to the trigger, but sudden movement in her peripheral vision made her pause. A new group of fighters was approaching the compound from the east. At least 8 men carrying heavy weapons, including what appeared to be rocket-propelled grenades. If they reached defensive positions, they could devastate the SEAL team, trapped inside the building. In that moment, Sarah faced an impossible choice. She could take the shot at Hakim and potentially complete the primary mission, or she could engage the new threats and save the lives of the men who had initially doubted her abilities. There wasn't time for both. The approaching fighters would be in optimal firing positions within seconds, while Hakim was almost at his escape route. Without hesitation, Sarah shifted her rifle toward the new threats. The mission objective was important, but she would not allow 8 American warriors to die on her watch. Her first shot dropped the fighter carrying the RPG launcher, causing the weapon to explode and eliminate 2 more enemies. The remaining 5 scattered for cover, but Sarah was already tracking them with deadly precision. Her second and third shots took down fighters trying to establish positions behind a concrete barrier. The 4th shot eliminated a sniper who was climbing onto a nearby rooftop with clear line of sight to the SEAL positions. Sarah's shooting was so fast and accurate that the surviving enemies couldn't determine where the fire was coming from. They began shooting wildly at shadows, revealing their positions for her follow-up shots. "Overwatch, where's Jackpot?" Razor's voice crackled through the radio as explosions and gunfire echoed from inside the target building. Sarah swung her scope back to the rear exit just in time to see Hakim disappearing into a maze of smaller buildings behind the compound. The primary objective was escaping while she had been saving the assault team. "Jackpot is mobile, heading east through the residential area," Sarah reported while continuing to engage threats around the compound. "I can pursue, but you'll lose Overwatch support." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. More enemy fighters were arriving from multiple directions, drawn by the sound of battle. The SEAL team needed her covering fire to fight their way out alive. Ghost's voice cut through the chaos from his sniper position. "I can't see half the compound from here. Overwatch, you're our only eyes on the whole battlefield. Stay put and keep us covered." Sarah acknowledged while dropping another fighter who was trying to flank the compound from the north. Her elevated position was indeed crucial for the team's survival, but watching Hakim escape felt like personal failure. The firefight continued for another 20 minutes as Sarah provided precision fire support for the SEAL team's fighting withdrawal. Every shot had to count because her ammunition was running low, and there was no possibility of resupply in her current position. She began rationing her remaining rounds, engaging only the most dangerous targets while conserving bullets for critical moments. As dawn began breaking over the mountains, the intensity of enemy fire finally decreased. Sarah had eliminated dozens of threats during the night, but more importantly, she had kept the SEAL team alive during their most vulnerable moments. Through her scope, she watched as Razor and his men established a secure perimeter around their extraction landing zone. "All elements prep for extraction," came the radio call they had all been waiting for. "Overwatch, can you make it to the LZ independently, or do you need escort?" Sarah looked down at the water tower's base where several dead fighters lay, sprawled around the ladder she would need to descend. Getting down would be almost as dangerous as climbing up had been. "I can make it," Sarah replied, beginning the careful process of packing her equipment while maintaining watch for threats. "Give me 5 minutes to climb down, and I'll meet you at the extraction point." As she began her descent, Sarah reflected on the night's events. They hadn't captured Hakim, but the mission had revealed something more important than any single target. The SEAL team that had initially questioned her abilities had witnessed her performance under the ultimate pressure. She had made impossible shots, executed a dangerous repositioning under fire, and ultimately chosen their lives over mission objectives. Trust wasn't something that could be taught in briefing rooms. It had to be earned through shared danger and proven reliability. Sarah reached the ground and began moving toward the extraction point, her rifle ready for any final threats. Behind her, the water tower stood like a monument to the longest night of her career. In just a few hours, she had gone from being the weak link in a legendary team to being the sniper who had kept them all alive through superior skill and courage. The extraction helicopter appeared over the horizon as Sarah reached the designated landing zone, her legs shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. The SEAL team was already in position, forming a defensive perimeter around the clearing where they would board the aircraft. As Sarah approached, she noticed something different in their postures and expressions. The skepticism and doubt from earlier had been replaced by something she had rarely seen from elite operators: genuine respect. Razor was the first to speak as the helicopter touched down, its rotors whipping dust and debris around them. "Outstanding. Work up there, Overwatch," he shouted over the noise. "That repositioning move saved all our lives." The other SEALs nodded in agreement, their faces showing admiration rather than the dismissive looks she had endured just hours earlier. Ghost, the primary sniper who had initially questioned her presence, gave her a thumbs up as they boarded the aircraft. During the flight back to base, Sarah finally allowed herself to process what had happened. She had eliminated 12 confirmed targets in just over 5 minutes of intense shooting, including the critical sequence that had saved the SEAL team from being overwhelmed by reinforcements. The precision required for those shots, especially the complex angles from the water tower, represented some of the finest marksmanship she had ever displayed under combat conditions. But more than the shooting statistics, Sarah realized she had passed a test that couldn't be measured in numbers. When faced with the choice between mission success and teammate survival, she had chosen her brothers in arms without hesitation. That decision would have consequences for her career and the larger war effort, but she knew it was the right choice. No strategic objective was worth the lives of 8 American warriors. As they landed at the forward operating base, Sarah was surprised to see a crowd waiting for them. Word of the night's action had already reached higher command levels, and several senior officers were present for debriefing. Colonel James Mitchell, the base commander, approached Sarah directly as she stepped off the helicopter with her rifle, still slung across her shoulder. "Lieutenant Martinez," the colonel said with obvious admiration. "I've been getting reports about your performance tonight that sound almost too good to be true. 12 confirmed kills in 5 minutes. A tactical repositioning under fire that prevented mission failure. I need to hear this story directly from you." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention, but she understood the importance of accurate after-action reports. The debriefing session lasted 3 hours as Sarah walked the intelligence officers through every shot, every movement, and every decision made during the operation. Her body camera footage and radio communications provided verification for her account, but the testimony of 8 SEAL operators carried the most weight. Each man described specific moments when Sarah's precision fire had saved their lives or enabled their tactical movements. What impressed me most wasn't the shooting, Razor told the assembled officers. Any good sniper can hit targets at 800 meters. What made the difference was her tactical thinking under pressure. She saw threats we couldn't see, anticipated enemy movements we didn't expect, and made decisions that kept us alive. That water tower repositioning was either genius or insanity, maybe both. Ghost added his perspective on Sarah's marksmanship abilities. I've been shooting professionally for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone engage multiple targets that quickly while maintaining that level of accuracy. Those weren't lucky shots. That was pure skill combined with ice-cold nerves, Imrais. Earned her place on any team I'm part of. As the formal debriefing concluded, Sarah learned that Hakim had indeed escaped the immediate area, but had been tracked by drone surveillance to another compound 20 miles away. A follow-up mission was already being planned, and the SEAL team had specifically requested her participation. The initial failure to capture their primary target had been overshadowed by the successful demonstration of integrated special operations capabilities. Later that evening, as Sarah cleaned her rifle in the armory, she reflected on how much had changed in just 24 hours. The weapon that had seemed like a burden during the helicopter insertion now felt like an extension of her own body. Every modification, every adjustment she had made over the years had contributed to the night's success. But more importantly, she had found her place among warriors who initially saw her as a liability. Razor approached her as she finished her weapon maintenance, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the relaxed expression of a soldier who had survived another dangerous mission. "You know," he said, handing her one of the cups, "when command told us we were getting a CIA sniper, I figured it was some political correctness bullshit. I've never been happier to be wrong about anything in my life." Sarah smiled for the first time since the mission began. "Thanks, Commander. I know I had to prove myself out there. I'm just glad I didn't let you down." Razor shook his head and looked directly into her eyes with the intensity that had made him a legendary team leader. "You didn't just prove yourself. You saved every one of my men. In our world, that makes you family." The next morning brought news that would validate Sarah's performance in the most meaningful way possible. Intelligence analysts had reviewed drone footage and communications intercepts from the previous night's battle. Her precision shooting had not only eliminated immediate threats, but had also disrupted a major Taliban offensive that was scheduled to begin within days. The fighters she had killed included several key commanders whose deaths would set back enemy operations for months. Word of Sarah's performance spread quickly through the special operations community. Within a week, she received requests from multiple SEAL teams, Delta Force units, and Ranger battalions asking for her support on upcoming missions. The woman who had once been seen as a potential liability had become one of the most sought-after assets in the theater of operations. But perhaps the most important recognition came from an unexpected source. A letter arrived from the widow of E., one of the soldiers killed in Hakim's previous attacks. She had somehow learned about the mission and wanted to thank the operators who had risked their lives trying to capture the man responsible for her husband's death. The letter reminded Sarah that every mission, every shot, every decision had real consequences for real families back home. As Sarah prepared for her next assignment, she carried with her more than just confidence in her abilities. She had learned that earning respect from elite warriors required more than exceptional shooting skills. It demanded courage under fire, loyalty to teammates, and the wisdom to make impossible choices when lives hung in the balance. The SEALs had initially thought she would slow them down, but instead she had shown them what it meant to be part of something bigger than any individual mission or objective.